Hello and welcome to this Marketing and Communications webcast brought to you by the Conference Board. My name is JP Kuwein and I'm the principal at Überbrands and leader here at the Marketing Institute for the Conference Board. Before we start, a household keeping item here, I think you call it, which is those people who want to get professional credits, CPE credits. You need to stay not only online, but we asked you that you ask some really pertinent questions too throughout to make sure that we know you pay attention and you're around and you'll get those credits that you deserve. And with that, today it is my particular pleasure to welcome Jim Stengel to the virtual table today. Jim was my colleague and our Global Marketing Officer at Procter & Gamble. Today he's President and CEO of the Jim Stengel Company, a much sought after consultancy and think tank in the area of marketing leadership, organization, marketing strategy. And we will be talking about two subjects he is most known for and passionate about, which are how to make purpose and innovation the backbone of strong companies and brands. And to make this most relevant, we will add how to navigate your brand and marketing organization through a crisis like the current one on hand. Of course, I'm talking about COVID-19. I think we'll find that purpose and innovation might actually be some of the key ingredients in tackling a crisis like this one. And of course, last but not least, we'll be addressing your questions. Some of you have already submitted them via email, but please submit them via chat, and you can start doing that right now, and we'll try to cover all or at least most of them. And with that, I want to first say thank you, Jim, for joining us, particularly under these unusual circumstances.
JP, it's good to see you. Good to hear your voice. Couldn't be more happy to be with you from my home in sunny Cincinnati.
Sunny Cincinnati, sunny New York City it is as well, even though the situation here is probably a little bit different. Who would have imagined that we were going to meet under these kind of very particular circumstances when we booked this just a few weeks ago? Before we get going, let me introduce you to the few people who might not yet have heard your name. I don't know how that would happen, but it might happen. So Jim, as I said, was the Global Marketing Officer at Procter & Gamble between 2001 and 2008. And at the time, he really orchestrated a big reinvigoration, starting actually with the organization. I definitely felt that being in that organization and focused the marketing organization on winning the hearts and minds of consumers, okay? And with that, really re-energizing those iconic brands of P&G as well, which include Always, Pampers, Tide, Venus, you name it. He drove P&Gers to really make communication, their communication to consumers world-class, and I mean Cannes Awards worthy world-class, and that was a big step for P&G. And then he also became particularly passionate about the power of purpose-led organization and purpose-led brands. And when he left P&G, he started to consult, talk, teach on the subject. He also wrote a book that became a bestseller in 2011 called Grow, How Ideals Power Growth and Profit in the World's Greatest Companies. He's mentored many CMOs, and so he can do a lot of name dropping. He's been named Marketer of the Year and inducted into the AMA Hall of Fame in 2017. I could go on forever. And not to rest on his laurels now, his attention has moved who has extended, I should rather say, to internal entrepreneurship at big companies too. And he's actually published a second book on that theme called Unleashing the Innovators, How Mature Companies Find New Life with Startups. And we're going to try and touch on all of these themes: world-class communication, purpose, innovation, and do this in the context of the crisis on top of it. So a big thanks to you again, Jim, for being on the show. And I hope you're all healthy and happy out there. Your family is good. Your organization is safe.
Oh, yes. Thankfully, JP, and thank you for that. I mean, we're doing what everyone is doing, right? We are finding new ways to work. We're trying to be extra creative, extra useful, extra helpful, taking care of our families first. You know, I have a daughter who's an intensive care unit nurse, so she's in California, so she's going to have a rough month. And so I'm here with my son and his new wife. We're hunkering down together in Cincinnati. My wife's with my daughter in California. So we're leveraging video chats and staying connected and, you know, watching movies together and having virtual cocktails. And we're doing what the rest of the world is doing to stay close to family, friends, and each other.
At the front line in every sense of the word. If we look at business, brand, marketing organizations, this current crisis, and you've lived through many of them as a marketing leader, does it remind you of anything you've experienced before? Did kind of feelings come back and you say, yeah, I'm familiar with that? And did it help you kind of start working through this crisis?
I think the answer to that, JP, is it is unlike anything before. So there is not a playbook, at least in our lives. There's not a precedent. But having said that, you know, if you strip away what's happening here, beyond the horrible health crisis we're going through, it's flipping everyone's assumptions. It's changing our patterns. It's changing how we normally work and interact with each other. So I think, and I think, you know, to some extent, 9/11 did that for a period of time. Certainly a war does that. And so what I'm finding in the people I'm talking to, and I was with about a dozen CMOs last Friday on a video conference about what each other are learning, what they're learning through this time. And of course, you know, people are they're focusing in the right areas, their own people, their customers, taking care of first things first. But they're also talking about how much creativity is coming out of their organization, because all the assumptions on decision-making and approval layers and bureaucracy have been turned upside down. So people their business models have suddenly changed, and so they are figuring out, you know, how can they be helpful? How can they be useful? How can they work in a different way? How can they find different ways to be helpful to their customers? So several CMOs, I mean, some businesses have hit the wall and some are booming. But everyone is working faster, more agile, with more creativity, more energy, and dealing with a lot of stuff that they're not used to, like things at home. Right? People are working around their kids and their spouses and their partners. So, but I think creativity is really coming out, and I hope when this blows over, and it will at some point, and things will not return, they will be different. I hope we keep some of this learning about how to work differently.
I mean, it seems to me, like you say, that companies are pushed, and particularly the larger companies, are pushed into quickly on their feet, rethinking some of their business model, some of their communication, some of their collaboration. I teach at NYU. I was amazed myself how within literally 48 hours, we moved from classroom instruction to virtual instruction, virtual assignments, virtual group work, and how a lot of the previous barriers and the reluctance to go that direction was just not questioned and pushed through. Could it be that this is actually an opportunity time that you can make, lemonade out of lemons here? I think there's an expression like it's a terrible thing to waste a crisis. Do you believe some important innovation, some important rejuvenation happens here that might not have happened otherwise?
Oh, I think so, and I just hope that we as leaders take a deep breath when we're out of the midst of this and engage our people and what did we learn here? What do we want to carry forward in terms of how we work? I think education is going to change dramatically because all of a sudden we've been thrown into a lot of online learning. I hope commuting changes. What if every company in the world had 1 day a week or 2 days a week where we work remote? What would happen to productivity? Right. What happens to pollution? What happened to
the smog in Los Angeles?
Exactly. I mean, the birds are singing even more, and so nice things are happening in the environment. So I just hope we take a deep breath, we engage our people in what do we learn, and we think about how we work differently going forward to be more creative, more productive, more useful, more helpful.
Right, right. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but when I thought about how we could talk about the crisis, I thought back to the time when you became GMO, Global Marketing Officer at P&G, when AG had just onboarded as the new CEO. And as you remember, it was quite a bit of a crisis, not only of the business, but maybe more importantly of the culture as well, the confidence of P&G. And you did quite significant things in bringing the organization culture forward. Today you would say pivoting. I'm not quite sure that's the right word, maybe evolving. Things like getting P&Gers to want to win awards at Cannes, which just a few months earlier would have seemed frivolous and useless and not business building. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities but also the difficulties of these kind of cultural moves that you need to make to bring an organization forward? How can you help the organization along in these moves? Like, for example, just in my high school here in our district right now, there's still this reluctance to move to virtual and the fear that it would devalue in-class work if we got used to it, for example.
Well, if I think back on P&G when I became Global Marketing Officer, we were in a business crisis. We were not in the kind of crisis we're in now that we're all sharing. But we had a couple bad quarters of earnings. Our CEO was let go. It was a new CEO, an untested CEO. I don't know, 70, 80% of our brands were losing market share. Our innovation was boring. Our communication was boring. So, my remit coming into that role was, think about what a great brand building company looks like today and going forward, and help build that. So I think the lessons are always begin with the issue at hand. If people don't understand and feel emotionally and rationally the compelling need to change, they don't change. So part of I didn't have to work hard at that because we were in a dramatic situation. But I didn't have the ideas. My first day when I was announced as head of marketing for P&G, Global Marketing Officer, I had a meeting like this where we gathered everyone in the global community together on a webcast. And I said to them, listen, I have this new role, and I don't know what the answers are, but I think together we can figure this out. So I engaged the organization in why we joined the company in the first place. So I asked everyone, why did you come to P&G and why are you staying here? And the unanimous feelings coming forward were, I joined here to be with the best. I joined here to be a great leader. I joined here to change the world in some small way. And I want to be part of the most innovative brand building company in the world. So that's all we had to do. That was our North Star. So then I solicited ideas from everyone. And I said, give me your ideas. I'll form a team that represents our global organization to synthesize these ideas, put them into strategies, and start acting on them. And certainly one of those ideas was to be a much more creative communicator, and that led us to Cannes.
And communication played an important role. I personally remember all of a sudden there were big shows with fire and ice, literally, you on stage like a rock star. I guess that was part of rallying the troops, finding new champions, creating visions and goals people want to wrap around. I mean, it's a whole communications project, a holistic communications project to kind of turn a oil tanker into a new direction.
Well, certainly bringing some excitement to the company was part of it, but excitement that was directed in the right areas. So, you know, gratitude, recognition is really important because it shows what we value, and it shows that at the end of the day, the people are who's, you know, the people make or break a company, of course. So what I tried to do is create some, you know, situations where we could share best practices, we could acknowledge what's important, we could showcase cases, people, stories, and that we, through those actions, we could demonstrate, you know, what brand building in this company is evolving to. And luckily we had some really great stories to tell, and we had more and more stories as the years went on, which is why we were growing.
And we can see on TV, I think, how much a little of appreciation goes, right? I mean, these manifestations of people clapping at regular hours to support the healthcare workers at shift changes seems to give them a huge boost. So this is important stuff. It's not secondary stuff to find these ways to acknowledge and energize people. But in what you said, there's also a kernel of what became a true passion of yours a little bit later, which is this idea that organizations that are very clear on their purpose, on their reason why they're around, why they're doing what they're doing, is what makes great brands. Can you talk to us about how you discovered that and how it moved you to getting deep into that?
Yeah, of course. You know, the first thing I would say is it is, I just think, amazing to see so many companies and organizations and institutions stepping forward during this crisis to show what's important to them, to sort of activate their purpose. And so I think the purpose movement, if you will, is going to get a lot of energy coming out of this crisis because people are putting the first thing. They're focused on the most important things right now, and that is helping people. And great brands are in service to people. Great brands are useful. Great brands are helpful. And we're seeing that in so many categories right now. And not just in communication, of course. I mean, communication is part of it, but it's what they're doing and how they're engaging their teams and how they're showing up for people at large. So I think what's going on around us is an incredible, you know, flood of purpose, innovation, and great actions. So, right. I mean, for me, what was the, you know, I think a significant chapter in my evolution on purpose, and we're all still learning, right? We're not perfect. But at the end of the day, I think it started with P&G going through this rebirth in the 2000s, and with A.G. Lafley as CEO, and he said to me, how do we become a more emotional company? How can we be less rational? How can we be less functional in kind of what our brands do? And if you recall P&G years ago, I mean, it was a very, very rational company, you know, famous for the demonstrations and side-by-side, all of that. So how do we become more important? How do we become more engaged? How do we become more of a, I mean, the head of Saatchi & Saatchi at the time was calling it love marks. So that led to what role can our brands play in the lives of people? How can they play a larger role? How can they be more important? How can they reframe their business, to put it the way a consultant would put it? And that kind of led us to this concept of purpose. There were other brands, of course, in this space, and we did what P&G does. We tested, we tried things, we learned, and we evolved our approach to purpose. And of course, we developed a framework for it. the key questions to ask, the criteria for a great purpose-led brand. How do you change your KPIs? And so I learned a tremendous amount, and I was a line manager, on Pampers before I became CMO, and that was kind of a laboratory of purpose. Pampers was
Right.
P&G's largest brand. It is P&G's largest brand, and it was one of the first ones to embrace this concept of we're in a larger business than diapers. We can make a bigger
Right.
difference with families and their baby development. So I learned by doing on that brand, and that's one reason that I was appointed Chief Marketing Officer, because I think the CEO and the board wanted that approach scaled across the company.
Right. And I introduced Pampers in India, the biggest baby market in the world, if you like, and that purposeful approach beyond keeping butts dry and sleeping overnight, i.e. a purpose of healthy, happy babies that's much bigger than the product, was the way to make people spend what is a relative fortune, particularly in that country's socioeconomic context. So I could clearly see that. When you look at brands, let's say in general first, but then in the current crisis, can you give us one or two examples where you think they're particularly strong because of their consistency and because of their actions? And then maybe some examples that might seem strong because everyone's talking about it, but where you think it's not that long-term or sustainable.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a question that came in from one of our viewers, listeners, about agility, and that is certainly one. Companies are just acting faster right now. Things are more decentralized. Decision making is pushed down. And I think the question is, how do we sustain that when we come out of this crisis? And it's a great question. It's a great comment. I don't quite know how we're going to sustain that, but one thing I would say is if we do capture the learnings explicitly, company by company, coming out of this crisis, and think about what worked for us and how we worked during this crisis, and to kind of establish some new norms, that's a big start. And I think there will be lots of articles written, maybe even some books about what businesses and brands learned during this unprecedented time. But I think each of us can, with our own teams, can take a pause when we're through this and say, what did we learn about working more quickly, more creatively, more agile? And so I really, really hope we do that. Michelle Peluso at IBM, who I interviewed on my podcast a few months ago, spoke during the entire podcast about changing the way IBM marketing worked to a totally agile approach. That's 4,000 people. So it will be interesting to see what they learned, having established sort of a more agile way of working going through this crisis. So maybe I should get her back on my podcast to share that learning. So, but anyway, JP, to get to your right, to get to your question directly, who's doing a great job? I was talking to a woman at Dabble, the language learning software company, last week. Their business is going through they're going through the roof, right? But not just because people are at home and thinking about, it's time to learn French. They're helping teachers who are now teaching online to use their software more effectively to continue to teach and to help their students learn. So that's, it is one example of just, pivoting a bit and doubling down on helping teachers. And certainly what you're seeing in in the food industry, the Krogers of the world, the Costcos, the Walmarts. I mean, they're just they're trying to take care of the people on the front line, to be there. I mean, what would we look like if they were having issues? It's hard enough to get food now, but if they hit a major stumble. So we're just seeing, Budweiser, they're classic. They understand their brand. I mean, the video they put out on Bud and the whites and the blues and the reds, my God, it's just heart-wrenching. And they're acting on it, right? They're redirecting a lot of the money they paid for sports.
Right.
Absolutely. And just helping people, helping the Red Cross.
Right. And
so
they're making hand sanitizer. in some of their breweries. They make hand sanitizers. I thought you're talking about food and you talk about the retailers. I have a client, and it's on a much smaller scale, but they were mainly in the direct, restaurant business, a little bit of CPG on the side. And now, since the restaurant had to be closed, totally pivoted, started making soups and easy to warm meals just for their neighborhood, and it's taken off. And they're seriously revamping their business model, going online, and they have this up and running within a couple of days. And they told me this is going to last. So there is definitely learning here on how, thinking outside the box and forcing yourself to think outside the box. So even if there's not a COVID-19 who breathes down your neck, can achieve incredible things if you're able to kind of ring fence these teams that do that and let them go, which I guess will bring us a little bit to your innovation learning later. But I had a mail-in question here because we asked some people to submit it by email, and this one is from Erich Johannes, and he's saying, obviously, the drive for purpose made a huge impact. He himself, he was a professor and now is a consultant as well, says, you cannot talk to any chief executive without talking about purpose, and they know what it's all about. He says, do you think, though, we're at the end here, or is this still very much work in progress? And particularly, how does purpose apply to these bleeding edge technology and platform brands and companies? Is it the same thing there?
It's a wonderful question, and here's how I would answer it. I was with the ANA in October at their annual meeting, the big U.S. trade organization, and I was in a room of, 150 senior marketing leaders, and I asked them to grade ourselves as an industry in 3 areas of purpose. One is kind of finding your purpose, right? Discovering it, refining it, making it explicit, and building many strategies off of that. I said, give ourselves a grade on purpose discovery. And they said, we're doing pretty well. Everyone's talking about purpose, they're trying it, so I'll give us an A- or a B+. And I said, okay, how are we doing in the second phase of purpose? And that is activating it, bringing it to life in daily work, living it, doing it. They say, not as good, maybe a C-. Some companies obviously are doing very well, some are just starting. Then I said, how are we doing in purpose measurement, in putting KPIs to purpose, in linking purpose activation to our business results? F. So are we where we want to be at purpose? Absolutely not. And until we're at discovery, activation, and measurement into one full cycle, it won't be built in a sustainable way. So a passion of mine right now in research and in partnership is figuring out how we can develop a scalable platform to measure purpose and link it in a predictive way to financial results. That's a huge area of innovation, and that's where I'm putting a lot of my energy now.
It strikes me as very quote-unquote proctoid, and I don't necessarily say that in a bad way. I'm a proctoid myself, but this strong desire to measure, to forecast, to create the correlation and create causation as the most important goal. There has been critique also around your push to measure and sharing the Stengel 50 in your book and doing the research with Millward Brown and so on around the Stengel 50. And I guess the core of the critique is, isn't that all about wishful seeing, i.e. this idea of I take great performers, I take the 0.1% of performers as far as their stock valuation or their profits go, and then I look for what I want to see and extract KPIs. Some of the chat here is asking for KPIs. is there a danger of, self-fulfilling prophecies and vanity measures? How do you get around that danger?
Well, I think when I wrote that book, what is it now, 8, 9 years ago, I worked with a top research supplier. It was a storytelling book. It was a book of inspiration. It was a book that provided a framework. It was a book that was looking for the link between business performance and purpose. But we had limited data then, and the technology and our ability to use big data and analytics is so much different today than it was 8 or 9 years ago. So I did my best back then to work with a research company and try to unpack this area of purpose. Looking for the perfect purpose measurement when I wrote that book 8 years ago was not my goal at the time. It was to sort of learn about what's happening in purpose and see if I can find linkages, correlations. But I think what we can do now is we can leverage the incredible computing power and analytics and data feeds we now have to look at various elements of purpose and purpose activation and look for causality, correlation at the minimum, but causality with financial results. So we're at a whole different place in terms of technology now. So I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic we can figure this out. There's a company I'm working with now who has a really, really encouraging software platform. So we're all in with them to learn about this. But I would say this, if you're working on a brand right now, you're working in a business, and you're inspired by this purposeful approach to building your brand, building your business, the first thing you can do is start to engage your people in that discussion. And when you're doing performance reviews, you're doing planning, to begin the discussion with, how do you feel you are bringing our purpose to life in your daily work? How are you making life better for our customers, for our employees, for other stakeholders? So it begins with discussion, engagement, and behavior change. And all of us can impact just by what we talk about, what we value, and how we handle, performance evaluations.
Right. It's interesting that you start with the employees, at least in your example, because what I find talking to clients, talking to students, is many of them jump immediately on the communication part. They jump on Coca-Cola stretching out their logo, or McDonald's kind of stretching out their arches to signal social distancing. They jump on Dior now creating hand sanitizer for hospitals in Paris, where I see the very purposeful companies that I've talked to. For example, Patagonia, which is one of the icons on purpose-driven companies, actually decided so far in this COVID crisis to stay relatively quiet while doing a lot of things internally. When you go on Patagonia on the website, you have to click on a little bar that says our message in this times of COVID-19. And there's a message by the CEO who says, right now we're trying to understand this like everyone else. We've given everyone, we've released everyone from the office, from the warehouse, our suppliers. We want them all to be safe first. Now we're learning how to work together. Please bear with us. We're not delivering any products right now because we want to first be sure that our workers are safe. This is a hidden message for those who are interested, but there are no big activist statements as you're used to, actually, by Patagonia. So would this indicate that the right way to live your purpose right now might be to actually be quiet and work and act quietly in the background rather than clamoring for attention? Or is that ultimately dangerous because top of mind, top of shelf, you might drop in the consideration set?
These are sensitive times, right? The unemployment numbers that were released today are astronomical. Every person is affected by this, and some very, very deeply. So it's going to be a really different environment for the unforeseen future. And we have to be more than ever in touch with that, sensitive to that for everyone in our community, our employees, our customers. And so I think our tone of voice, we need to get back to being, human. Let's, generosity, the right sense of optimism, not hyperbole, but optimism, trying to help. And this is going to be with us for a long time. So, how should brands communicate in these times? I just think it needs to be caring, human, empathetic, honest, reflecting your purpose, reflecting your priorities. And some brands like Budweiser will make a beautiful video, but they better follow up on that. And I think they are. Some will be quieter about it. I mean, our alma mater, P&G, is doing incredible things for their employees, starting in China. They've pivoted to making masks and other protective things. They're not shouting that. They're doing it. And so I think it is about doing. It is about action. It is about honesty. And this isn't an 8-week thing. If the country is going to be, countries around the world are all going to be in a very, very different place for a long time. I think we're going to come out of it, but come out of it is not returning to normal. Come out of it is something else.
Right. We've got a little mini-series as a podcast here at the Conference Board. And in the first episode, I talked to a consumer culture expert, Martin Carafa, and he said we should take into consideration 2 things. One is memory structure, and the other one that there is a link to what we're living in almost anything. So in memory structure, he says, memory structure, if you established well that you stand for something, can survive a couple of weeks and can be reanimated when the context is right. So you don't need to push yourself and try to get into a conversation where you just don't fit. But the other point he made, which I think was interesting, and I'd love to get your ideas and observations on that, is that he can think almost of a product that cannot, and a brand more importantly, that cannot be helpful in these times, at least at some moment and in some context and on some medium. And I challenged him talking about cat litter and motor oil because I thought, well, the usual candidate, toilet paper, is actually in high demand and top of mind right now. But even on cat litter, he said, cats and pets in general give a lot of comfort to people, particularly lonely people, particularly people who are older right now. And they're very vulnerable people in this time. So certainly a company that deals with pets, and whether it's cat litter or food or whatever, can contribute positively. And for motor oil, he said, well, trucks are what keeps us going right now in the supply chain. And sure enough, there's going to be some link and some good that a motor oil company can do. How are you thinking about that? And have you come across some of these? Have you maybe even helped some companies come across these purpose links to what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. I love what you just said. And that's why I think there's going to be an acceleration in purpose activation coming out of this. It's happening as we speak, and it's not going to stop. So, because I think people are really putting first things first. I was on a conference call last week with General Mills CMO, and he said, we used to talk about our reason for being as, comfort foods that people love and makes them feel, warm, special, kind of home, just all those nice emotions that come with comfort food and being home. He said we flip that to we're making foods that people need, that will help them survive, that will help them feed their families. So that sense of urgency to get their products, which are center store kind of products, to every possible person they can in new channels, new ways, new distribution, and the creativity they're bringing to that is remarkable. So that's what I mean. People are just getting, I think, sharper. They're changing their paradigm a bit, and they're trying to be ever more useful. And we're seeing that across every single category. And I think it's very, I think the creativity is going to stay with us, and I think purpose is going to go into a whole different level of overdrive.
I think you're probably talking about Ivan Polar, if that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
At General Mills. He's a good friend of the conference board. He's been on some of our podcasts, so this is a good plug. Thank you very much. Not intended.
He's a great leader. He's a great leader.
To check out some of our content at the conference board, the webcast, the podcast, etc. Ivan is there. Also, later this afternoon, I'm actually recording another podcast on how to creatively approach this crisis from a creative who's been 30 years in the industry. So definitely check that out. Now, you talked about General Mills and the staples they have. A lot of talk also about Campbell Soups, about Clorox, maybe companies that just a few months ago critics called down and out. We had a podcast or a webcast with Joseph Jaffe, and he predicts, all big companies at least are built to suck and will die unless they do something. I think you heard that presentation as well at the ANA. It seems they are at an upswing right now. I mean, people are buying baked beans like crazy, and Heinz is actually providing breakfast for free for people who can't afford it. So again, linking purpose with their product. Is it going to be enough, though, once this COVID surge is flattening out again? Will people go back to organic foods, fancy foods, direct delivery by Blue Apron Kitchen and other high-tech ways of delivering? How can these companies, these big players, get ready now for the post-COVID time? Because we all know and hope it'll come. And that might relate to your Unleash the Innovator. So I'm trying to transition over into that other theme that you're covering.
Well, yeah, I think the key principle here is no one knows how habits and patterns will shift coming out of this. I mean, there are some headwind, or there are some categories that will have some tailwinds coming out of this. Things like protective, hand sanitizers, wipes, masks. These are all categories that are probably going to be stronger coming out of this, and not just for the next 6 months, I think for quite a bit of time. But we don't know. Are people going to go back to the movies? Are they going to go back to walking through the grocery store the way they used to? Or has this just been an incredible surge on, direct to consumer that will be with us forever? So habits and practices are changing, but we have to get back, we have to be more and more agile. We don't know what behavior is, how behavior is changing. We're seeing some patterns now, but I think whatever you do in your company to stay close to consumer habits and practices and attitudes, ramp that up and be ready to move more quickly than ever to try to be helpful and useful and build your business as habits are changing. We don't know what this is going to look like. This isn't going to be, May 1st, you can run back out there. It's going to be much more gradual, much more tentative, and much more of kind of a long sort of tail of a recovery. But everything will not recover at the same pace, and many categories are forever changed.
Jim, do you think you can and should go beyond the consumer understanding and what happens and observe the kind of post-surge environment and the post-COVID environment? I've talked to some folks, among other things, a very interesting visual emotion management company that takes video to analyze how people feel, and they've got an AI that gets ever smarter about detecting whether people are worried, happy, concerned, thinking, paying attention. And they seem to not wait for what will happen, but they look at, okay, everyone's moving to Zoom meetings, everyone's moving to webinars, people are more and more not only in front of a screen, but keeping their camera open. I can insert a lot of knowledge creation into that for other companies, and they're moving hard right now to get in and stay there. So do you think that maybe even a, Heinz baked beans or a Clorox should already test or at least think about how they do make sanitizing a continuous habit, how they might evolve their product to not only be a floor or laundry sanitizer, how they might completely change their distribution to now also include direct-to-consumer, maybe virtual delivery. There might be ways of virtually sanitizing and extending it to your laptop. I'm fantasizing here. How proactive should particularly the big ones be, knowing that the small agile companies are pushing in without relent?
Well, I think it's never too early to start thinking and engaging the intellect and creativity of your organization. So absolutely. I think the earlier you start thinking about what does this mean for us coming out of this, the better. I mean, having said that, many companies right now are doing everything they can to take care of their people, to establish new ways of communication, to get products to customers in a new way. So some of the organizations I'm working on are on overdrive, and there's a lot of fatigue. So I think you have to be sensitive to that. But I think in any category you're in, to think about, I mean, if you're in healthcare right now, and you're in the business of making therapeutic products and vaccines, I mean, J&J is now saying they're going to have a COVID-19 vaccine by early 2021. I suspect they are experimenting with really, really different ways to work in an unprecedented level of speed. So I think, yes, engaging your organization in some strategic thinking, some creative thinking, some planning for what are a couple scenarios that we're going to want to, experiment with now, as long as the organization is ready to do it.
Right. And it's not stopping with vaccines. There's a lot of emotional and psychological support that comes to the fore, and the importance of that. And there's a lot of companies that are looking into, for example, virtual platforms of delivering that. In your book, Unleash the Innovators, you specifically are interested and talk about actually collaboration and partnerships between the big guys, whether that would be J&J, Topical Now, and Clorox, or General Motors, and then smaller companies, startups in particular. It seems, again, some of them are almost forced to work together right now. Very prominently, there's a lot in the press about GM working with that ventilator, I think they're called, manufacturer. And then, they're getting criticized, but they're saying, look, we're going really fast for what GM usually does. This is from, macro skills to micro skills. This is cleaning out production sites. This is, switching all of our suppliers to small, making different kind of parts, et cetera, et cetera. What have you learned about how to best partner up and leverage these partnerships to the positive? Because I imagine a lot of the people on the show today are looking at that or have already started working with much smaller companies.
Well, it's a big topic, JP, that you bring up. And the first thing I would say is the reason I wrote the book is I just noticed almost every large company I was working with was working with startups. But it was all over the place in how they were doing it and how they felt about the effectiveness of it. So I thought it was just an interesting space to jump into, to research and to learn about. And I think the first thing you can do is, take a hard look at your business strategies and what you're trying to achieve as a company, what kind of company you're trying to become. And don't assume you have all the answers, and assume there are a lot of interesting people, entrepreneurs, small companies that could help you get there. So some of the most effective companies I studied were the ones that were clear about where they were trying to go and had a pretty good way of looking at the world to figure out who else was trying to do that and how could they establish partnerships. Motorola Solutions is a B2B company that serves public safety primarily, and they have a fabulous program for being clear on where they're trying to go as a company and looking for partnerships that can help them get there more quickly. And the really smart companies, find these companies to work with, make sure they share a common purpose, common goals, and they take learning from how these companies work back into the mothership. So I think the most important lesson is just don't go dabble with startups because it's fun. Go seek interesting people, companies, entrepreneurs who will help you get to where you're trying to go more quickly and challenge the way you do business and challenge the way you work.
So be on strategy. When we did research with a completely different angle, Wolfgang Schäfer and myself, for our book about how to create premium brands and how to elevate brands, we found that large groups that want to be in the game of premium brands and often acquire, luxury or prestige brands to make them part of their portfolio, those who succeeded at that practiced what we called ring fencing, meaning they looked at these operations and they understood what was uniquely the DNA of this premium brand, and they were then protecting that from the bigger group. And if the unique DNA was in manufacturing, they let the plant be alone and not standardize processes and not force on them the scaled suppliers, at least not until they understood what effect that would have. And if the uniqueness was in retail or in the organization, they would ring fence the marketing organizations or the retailer relationships, even if it didn't fit with the classic channels of their group they now belong to. Did you observe something similar, that when you do these partnerships, you need to be careful not to be overbearing, to standardize and scale away the unique advantages that often smaller partner brings?
Oh, absolutely. And we actually brought some data to that. We did actually a quant study with 200 companies who had active programs with startups. And those that, as you say, ring-fenced the partnership and put the startup leader in charge, not a leader or a manager from the larger company, had a much higher success rate on the partnerships. So yes, ring-fence them, give the startup a lot of rope with common goals, have someone from the big company to be their navigator, their barrier buster, someone whose job is to help them be successful. Those we found were the attributes of partnerships that really work. Then, of course, there is a time to bring that learning back into the base business to challenge some of the ways that they do business.
Right. And Derek Van Rensburg, if you know him, at Coca-Cola at the time, he ran the corporate venturing group. He did a fantastic time in taking on brands like Honest Tea, for example, and ring-fence them, literally not let them go on the Coke truck for distribution, because it would have distracted both the Coke distribution supply chain as well as the Honest Tea needing to reach different kind of shops, until both, we're in a scale-to-scale position to actually synergize. And like you say, this corporate protector role. I'm just thinking of A.G. Lafley, the CEO that we talked about early on at P&G, protecting the SK2 premium brand from being divested, from being integrated. And the SK2 brand is being an incredible pull right now. It's over $1 billion brand and very profitable. Who would have known? I'm looking here at the chat questions, and there was one about, you talked about this earlier, people under a lot of stress. On the positive side, they learn how to be incredibly agile, even with sometimes their children on their knee or nagging at their foot, which happened to me during a lecture as well. It all turns out fine. People are showing incredible improvisation, innovation power as teams, agile teams. And here's the kind of a bit worried question, how do we make sure that once we get back into our big matrix at office organization, all of that doesn't get washed away because now the day-to-day takes over again? Do you have some tips for people there?
Well, I think it comes down to making time to digest this learning. You know, if everyone just runs back into what they were doing before when this is winding down, we would have wasted the learning. So I think it's really important to say what worked for us and what didn't. You know, what was more productive, what was faster, what was more effective. You know, just make the time. And if you're a leader, if you're a leader of your team or of your company, you know, step that up. Show that that's important to you. Show that you're going to take the time to reflect on what just happened. You know, I was talking with a large, you know, alcoholic beverage wine company a few days ago, and man, you know, on-premise has hit a wall. There's nothing on-premise now, right? No bars, restaurants are open, of course. But what are they doing in terms of virtual tastings and showcasing recipes and highlighting, you know, famous bartenders and mixologists and making it easy for friends to get together for virtual, you know, drinks and chats? So that's a whole different marketing channel. So what in that space has been effective? So we absolutely have to take the time to reflect on this and to deliberately say, you know, some of this was a better way to work, and let's keep this going. It's all about leadership, right? It's all about leadership and showing that.
I think that's a great call to action to close this webcast, because unfortunately time's flying. The hour is over. I want to take just a minute to thank you again for coming on the show in unusual times. If there are members who want to follow up, who are interested in your books, in what you're doing, in yourself, maybe even get in touch, what's the one best way to do that?
Just reach out. Reach out to jim@jimstengel.com. Tweet me. You know, whatever's easiest for you. And then there are a lot of questions that came through that we didn't get to, so be happy to engage in some of that. But whatever channel is good for you, just reach out.
Excellent. So here's an open door, everyone. Run into it. Maybe not everyone at the same time. And you all, dear participants, I want to thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We're doing many. We're doing these at least once monthly. And as I mentioned, there's a ton of content, including a ton on marketing, communication, as well as managing your marketing organization during times of COVID. Check us out with our podcast and the entire catalog at the conference board. Basically, just look up conference-board.org/podcast, and you'll find us there. So with that, thanks again, Jim, and goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, JP. I enjoyed it.